In the middle of the New Mexico desert, under tons of concrete and sand, there was a grave. Not for a person, for an empire. In 1983, one of the most powerful companies on the planet loaded truck after truck with its own products, nearly 800,000 video game cartridges, and buried them in the dark, in secret, in a landfill. For decades, everyone thought it was an urban legend. Until in 2014, they dug, and the legend was right there. Proof of one of the fastest and most brutal collapses in the history of technology. This is the story of Atari. The company that literally invented the video game industry became the fastest growing company in United States history. And 3 years later was bearing its own failure in the desert. Atari wasn't killed by a competitor, it drowned in its own success. To understand the size of the fall, go back to 1972. Two engineers, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, start a company with a name taken from a Japanese game, Atari. The first product is absurdly simple. 2 white bars and a dot bouncing across the screen. Pong. They install a prototype in a bar called Andy Capp's Tavern in California, just to test it. A few days later, they get a call. The machine has stopped working. Bushnell rushes over, worried, opens the cabinet, and finds the problem. The machine hadn't broken, it had jammed. It was overflowing with quarters. Too many people wanting to play. In that instant, Bushnell understood something nobody had understood yet. This was not a toy. It was a gold mine, and the race to exploit it was only beginning. The money came so fast that Atari itself couldn't keep up. In 1976, with no cash to grow, Bushnell sells the company to the giant Warner Communications for $28 million, a fortune at the time. And in 1977 comes the move that changes everything, the Atari 2600. Instead of a machine with a single game, a console that ran any game, on cartridges you could swap. The living room became the arcade. For the first time, millions of families had a video game in their home. The success was breathtaking. By 1980, Atari was making more than $2 billion a year. It was the fastest growing company in United States history up to that point. It came to represent a third of all of Warner's revenue. A third of an entire conglomerate came from little games. But growing too fast has a price, and the bill was on its way. At its peak, Atari believed a dangerous lie, that anything with its logo would sell. And for a while it did. The public was hungry for games, and the company dumped cartridges into the market as fast as possible. The problem is that, in the rush, quality became an afterthought. The programmers and the people who actually made the games were treated as invisible workers with no credit and no bonus, while the company made billions. Furious, the best of them walked out and founded the first independent game studio. Suddenly, anyone could make cartridges for the 2600, and they did. The market was flooded with hundreds of games, most of them garbage. The shelves filled up with junk nobody wanted, and the customer, once starving, started to distrust everything. Atari had created the market, and now it was drowning it. And then came the symbol of all that arrogance. In 1982, Atari paid a fortune for the rights to the most popular movie in the world, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It was supposed to be the biggest game in history, but the board wanted it on shelves for Christmas and gave the programmer about 5 weeks to build the entire game. 5 weeks, a job that normally took months, squeezed to fit a date. The result was a disaster, a confusing, frustrating game where the character kept falling into pits. Atari manufactured millions of cartridges, certain it would sell them all. It sold a fraction. The rest sat there. E.T. went down in history as one of the worst games ever made, and as the moment the biggest video game company in the world proved it had completely lost control. But E.T. wasn't the cause of the disaster. It was only the warning that it had already begun. When people realize they're being fooled, they don't complain. They simply stop buying. And that's exactly what happened. The stores packed with bad games nobody would take started slashing prices in desperation. Cartridges that cost $35 ended up at $5, then at less than $1. The retailers burned, sent the stock back, and swore never to bet big on video games again. The word Atari, which had been a synonym for the future, became a synonym for loss. And worse, it wasn't only Atari sinking. Because it owned the market, when it staggered, the floor vanished under the entire industry. The domino effect was set. It only needed the final push. And it came as a number no one at Warner wanted to believe. At the end of 1983, the bill arrived. Atari's losses passed $500 million. In a single year, the company that was a third of Warner's revenue became a hole in the balance sheet. The American video game market, worth billions, practically evaporated, shrinking to a fraction of its size. It became known as the Great Crash of 1983, and for a while the whole world thought video games had just been a fad, like the yo-yo. Atari was left with an entire warehouse in Texas, full of cartridges worth nothing. And that's when the most symbolic scene of all took place. In the dark, far from the cameras, the company loaded trucks with that dead stock, E.T., Pac-Man, and hundreds of thousands of others, and dumped it all in a landfill in the New Mexico desert. They covered it with concrete, like someone hiding a body. In 1984, Warner gave up and sold off the console division. The empire was over. Here is the part almost nobody tells. 2 years after the crash, Japanese company called Nintendo entered the very market everyone had left for dead and made a fortune. How? By doing the exact opposite of Atari, rigidly controlling the quality of the games, respecting the customer, treating every release as something that had to be good, not just fast. The industry hadn't died. It had only grown sick of being fooled. And that's the lesson Atari paid dearly to teach. No empire dies because the market ran out. It dies when it starts to despise its own base, when it trades quality for speed and the customer for this quarter's profit. Atari invented the game, but it forgot the player. And in 2014, when they dug those cartridges out of the desert, they didn't just find old plastic. They found the buried reminder that arrogance has an expiration date. Atari held the world in its hand and buried it in the desert. If you like watching, up close, how the greatest empires dig their own graves, this channel is Collapse Docs. Subscribe, because every episode we open the case of a giant that had everything it needed to win and destroyed itself. Next time, a company so dominant that its name became the word for an entire industry, and still it was ground into dust.